Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about skill-based XP. I did a video a few weeks ago where I talked about what I thought the best way to give XP was, which, spoiler warning, is through quests, because that's the way I thought most encouraged players of any build to advance through your game. This generated a ton of discussion. Really good discussion. By the way, it was a perfect example of why I like doing this channel. I was reading all these comments, I responded to some of them, and it made me think. So I thought, hey, let's do a video on skill-based XP. Now, I've done a video on class-based versus skill-based systems that you also may want to watch. These videos will be linked below. You just may want to watch it first to know what I'm talking about, but at a high level, I'm saying, what if instead of you picking a class, you just had a bunch of skills you could pick from? By the way, what I'm going to talk about applies to any kind of progression. Skill-based, it could be perk-based, it could be trait-based, it could be background-based, it could be attribute-based. Basically, anything that the character selects that is subsequently used to determine an outcome in a game, in your game, that outcome, when it happens, could reward some XP to the factors that went into determining it. Now, what's interesting about skills, though, is skills usually have a direct application to something you're doing. Like, here's my trap disarming skill. Here's my hitting you with a sword skill. So it's very direct. Where an attribute might be something like, I'm stronger, so I do more damage. So when I hit with a melee weapon, so if I hit someone with a sword, how much XP goes to my skill versus how much goes to my strength? And can I even raise strength? So I'm just going to talk about this as if it's skills. You can generalize it to anything you want. Also, skills have an interesting aspect that the other ones I mentioned don't, like perks or backgrounds, in that they can fail. I'm going to talk about that more later. But let's just talk about skill-based XP. And I'll define what I mean by it, and then what problems I see happening. Because keep in mind, I'm not telling you not to do this. Instead, I'm saying, if you do this, here's some problems you're going to run into, and you're going to have to figure them out because you want to do this. I'm not recommending you do this, but I'm not telling you not to do this either. I'm saying if you do this, you got to fix these problems. So, skill-based XP is basically whenever you use a skill, you gain a little bit of XP for that skill. Like every skill has an XP bar. When that XP bar fills up, the skill goes up. You get a little better. You go up to the next level of the skill, whatever that means. Maybe it numerically goes up. Maybe it goes from beginner to expert, whatever. And the bar empties out, and you have to refill it by using that skill again. Seems pretty straightforward, and it seems like, hey, this is great. This would make players want to use the skills they get. Why would I ever not want to do this? Let me explain what's going to happen when you do this. And you've played games like this. So when people talk about this, I'm like, there are a lot of games on the market that do this, and they have these problems. Maybe you don't care. Maybe you don't think they're problems, and that's fine. But I'm going to walk through what I think they are, and that you probably at least should consider them, even if your consideration is, I don't care. So, first of all, let's talk about what does it mean to use a skill. You're probably going, duh, Tim, that's easy. Is it? Let's take a combat skill. That seems pretty easy. Every time I swing a sword, should I get skill for it? What if I just use it to break a bunch of barrels? Does my skill go up? Oh, maybe you mean it only works against hostile creatures. Okay. Is that the only thing that matters? Because if they're not hostile and I attack them, if you're saying if they're not hostile, I don't get skill points, then does a stealth attack not give me skill on the attack portion? Because they're not hostile, because they're never even aware of me. So you're going to have to figure that out. What does it mean? How are you going to detect the difference between something that never could become hostile versus something that it could have been hostile, but I killed it in one blow, so it never became hostile? Figure that out. Speaking of stealth, I just brought it up. How does stealth work? What makes stealth go up? Now, you could say if a stealth attack, if you do one, maybe that gives a little points to your attack mode and your stealth. Okay, that makes sense. What about if I'm just stealthing around? Does that give me any points? Do I have to attack? Does that mean if I do, does that mean a pacifist stealth character is not possible in your game? If stealthing around gives me XP, how? How does that work? What is it? What exactly is the event that happens that gives me XP? Is it standing near someone long enough that they don't recognize me and suddenly I gain XP for it? Wow, I'll just sit there in a bush behind some low perception guard and my XP will go through the roof. Is that what you want? Is that because that's what you're encouraging? Or maybe every character in the world has a little bit of stealth XP they can hand out, and they hand it out to anybody who successfully gets in a certain radius of them and isn't detected. That's great. You just added a lot of work to your programmers, and I hope you explain to the player, you've already wrung as much XP from this guy as possible. You better not just keep hanging around. You're not getting anything more. You're going to have to explain that. So, now that I've talked about what it means to use a skill, let's talk about all the different skills in the game and constraints on how often you can use them. Because combat is usually frequent in an RPG. Maybe it's not, but let's say it is. With random encounters and everything, you can just run around fighting things all day long. Is that what you're encouraging people with the combat skills to do? Hey, what if I have a summon spell or a summon scroll? Can I just summon things and then fight them? This goes back to whether or not they're hostile. But if I attack a summon thing and it becomes hostile, do I then get XP for it? Can I just sit in my room all day and summon low-level things and kill them? That sounds trivial way to raise combat. If I can't, how do you determine the difference between it? And better yet, how are you going to express that as a very specific rule so your programmers can code it? Because they can't use vague terms. You're going to have to define what it is about a creature that grants the combat XP. What about skills that aren't used in combat, that are used against placed things? What about using a dialogue skill against an NPC or picking a lock? There are probably a limited number of those things placed in the world. Once you've persuaded every NPC there is to persuade and unpicked every lock there is to pick, was that enough to get your skill up? Are all these things placed so the player can find them? Is it going to be fun to have to go around and find all these things? Now, procedural generation might help you out here. And I have a whole video on procedural generation. I'll link it below. Well, how can it help you out? Because when you clear out an area, maybe when it respawns with, maybe there's a shopkeeper who respawns in there that you can persuade for lower prices. Or maybe there's bandits and they spawn in with a locked chest that you can pick. Great. I hope you're making, if you use procedural generation, I hope you're making a broad enough thing that every possible skill that the player would ever want to use appears in some procedural generation somewhere. Now, it's probably a lot easier to procedurally generate random encounters. From experience, I can tell you, yes, it is. So again, combat skills are going to kind of dominate here because that's something that you're going to find easier to do. So that may lead you to go, wait, some skills are used way more frequently than other skills. I swing my sword 5 to 10 times, 10 to 30 times in a combat where I only pick a lock once. So you might go, well, how will I fix that? Maybe combat skills have a bigger bar to fill, or maybe every time you use them, it fills the bar less. You're going to have to do something like that. Otherwise, people are going to get in the first few combats in your game, and bam, all their combat skills are 100. And meanwhile, it's going to take them weeks of play to get their lockpick skill up. Now, making a fair and balanced feeling system for all your different skills is going to be tricky and time-consuming. Good luck with that. So, here's another question I want you to ask, because I will frame it as a question rather than the problem, which is your skill-based XP system. Is that really going to encourage players to play the game you want them to play? Are they running around in low-level areas just picking fights over and over again with rats until their combat skills are 100? Are they just casting fireball repeatedly, maybe against a wall, just to raise that skill? Are they jumping off a wall to get jumping up? Did they find an NPC somewhere in your world who resets their persuasion line every time you leave town? Maybe it's a shopkeeper that you can persuade to give low prices, or maybe it resets every 24 hours. So now they're leaving and re-entering town, or they're camping out in front of the shopkeeper for 24 hours. Just reset it so they can go persuade, 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 persuade. Is this really how you want them to act? Because, or better yet, is this how you want play guides that will come out online? And videos of people going, here's the best way to play this game. Just camp in front of this shopkeeper for 3 years. Your persuasion skill will get 100. Now you can coast through the game. Is that really what you want people to do? Because that is what you are encouraging. And remember, once you give some XP, that's you, the designer, telling the player, this is what I encourage you to do, because here's the best, awesome currency I can ever give you, experience points. So, this brings me to something else. Does the player need a level in a skill-based system? A lot of people have talked about, there's a lot of tabletop RPGs that don't have levels. GURPS didn't have a level. They replace it with other things like how many points you've gained or where your skills are at. But you may want to decide, do I not have a player level anymore? And if you decide no, here's some questions you're going to have to ask. How will your encounter designer determine challenges for levelless players? Will it have to dig down and go, well, their combat skills are high, or some of their combat skills are high? Maybe none of their combat skills are high, so they keep giving them low-level encounters. And they keep doing whatever it is they're doing to keep those skills low. So nothing is a very high-level monster in the game. Maybe they're spending their points in various things, and now it's hard for you to come up with a character that's hard for them to persuade. How do you plan out encounters that are challenging in a world where everything goes up in a haphazard player-based use system? Even more, if you don't have levels, when or how does the player gain hit points? So well, they're more powerful, they can take harder hits. Or do you not need hit points anymore? Do you start with the same number of hit points that you end the game with? Maybe you've thought that out. Curious how your combat works if that doesn't happen. But I'm not telling you not to do it, I'm telling you figure it out. Okay, let's say you've solved all of these problems. Let me throw one more idea into the mix. Consider having skills gain XP not when you use them, but when you use them and they fail. Why? Why would you do that? Well, first of all, this creates a very natural feeling progression. People learn more when they fail at something. When you succeed at something, you don't know why you succeeded, but when you fail at something, you almost always know why you failed. I've got a whole video on learning from failure. I'll link it below. But some other reasons come up with this system. If when you fail, you gain XP, and when you succeed, you don't, generalists suddenly become a more common and possible build. Because if you constantly try to do different things and your skills are low, you're going to fail at all those things, and your skills are going to go up. A lot of different skills are going to go up. Specializing in a skill will take time and focus. You want to be good at locks, you're going to have to find a lot of locks and pick a lot of locks. And fail at those locks. Fail at picking them and try them again and try them again. Maybe once you fail out a lock and it gives you XP, you don't get any more learning from that lock. Maybe you keep getting points from it until it succeeds, and then then you're out of getting points from that lock. Or maybe it's got a number of XP it can give you, kind of like that stealth example I gave, where the guard had a certain number of points to give to anyone trying to stealth by. Maybe a lock has here's how many points you can earn off me from failure until I'm exhausted. You've learned everything you can possibly learn from this lock, even if you keep failing. You can do that. But specialists mean you're gonna be running around and trying to find all of these things. Now, at this point, you may be upset because you're like, hey, if I only learn from failure, then once I start succeeding all the time, I won't be able to raise my skill. Well, here's a question for you. If you're always succeeding at the skill, why do you need to raise it up? Why do you need a higher skill? You're always succeeding at it. If your melee attack is never missing, if you go up to every lock and pick it on the first attempt, why does it need to get better? You're already succeeding all the time. And if you're not succeeding all the time, then you're failing and you're getting XP from it. So those questions are interlocked and answer themselves. Finally, what does learning from failure do in your game? I talked about what you try to encourage your players to do. Learning from failure encourages players to seek out challenges. They want to find combat that's tough. They want to find locks that are hard to pick, because those are the very things that they'll learn from and get better at. So people will seek out challenges because your game encourages them to do so. Not sit in some sewer killing dozens of rats to get their dagger skill high. They want to go find things that are actually hard to kill. So, I hope I've given you a lot of things to think about. Like I said, I'm not saying don't make a skill-based XP system. I'm saying once you give XP for skills or perks or traits or backgrounds or anything, you will be encouraging the player to play a certain way. And you are introducing some problems into your game that you're going to have to solve. Not saying you can't solve them, just saying you should. Or expect some reviewers and critique from gamers about your game about the very things I just mentioned. So, have fun with that, and I hope that's given you a lot to think about for skill-based XP.